Welcome to Green Dot Daily, live every weekday at 3 Eastern on the Action app. And if you're watching on YouTube, we hope you're subscribed to our channel. I'm Maria Marino, and coming up on the show, we'll talk NHL with Michael Leboff and get MLB picks from Billy Ward. But we start in the NBA. The Cavaliers are favored once again, looking to go up 2-0 on the Magic. The game tonight at 7 Eastern, 80% of bets and money are on the Cavs to win and cover. Donovan Mitchell scored 30 in the Game 1 win, and his points prop is set at 25.5. After pulling away from the Sixers in Game 1, the Knicks remain the favorite for tonight's Game 2. Not only is the health of Joel Embiid in question, Tyrese Maxey, who scored 33 on Saturday, was not at morning shoot-around due to an illness. And the Nuggets won their 9th straight game against the Lakers on Saturday. Denver favored again tonight at home, where they're 34-8 straight up this season. Pro top props, by the way, in the Action app are riddled with Anthony Davis overs. I now cede the floor to our NBA Commander-in-Chief, Matt Moore, for his State of the Union address. Matt, take it away.
My fellow NBA fans, what a great start to the NBA playoffs. While the games were in some ways a little predictable given the strength of the home teams, still had great action and set up for some fantastic matches going forward and some great betting opportunities. Let's start with the good. How about the great coaching we saw over the weekend? You know, everyone was on the Suns, a very popular, trendy pick, and we saw Chris Finch, who adapted his matchups and play style versus the Suns. He put Jaden McDaniels on Devin Booker and shut the water off. They let Kevin Durant ISO as much as he wanted to his little heart's content, and it did not wind up making any of the Suns better. They weren't able to get consistent offense versus the Wolves, while Anthony Edwards beasted Karl Anthony Towns, attacked in the post. It was great stuff from Chris Finch in this first game. Ty Lue, loved what he did with the Clippers win over the Mavericks. In the first 2 minutes, they picked up 2 quick fouls on Daniel Gafford and effectively took him out of the game, attacking with Ivica Zubac. Much of the Mavericks' post-All-Star success has been built on Daniel Gafford suddenly looking like Dikembe Mutombo. And then in Game 1, he looked like, well, Daniel Gafford, who played for the Wizards for 4 years. That's a little more like it. Great matchup adjustment by Ty Lue to put pressure and get them out of their rotations early. Doc Rivers adjusted to the degree that he can, especially in the bench units. You saw a lot of at-level coverage. They weren't playing drop with Bobby Portis. They were playing aggressive versus the Pacers to get them out of rhythm. And Mark Daigneault, late in that game for the Thunder versus the Pelicans, when things were going haywire and SGA's turning it over, calls timeout, gets his guys together, and settles them down. And they close the game with more poise than the New Orleans Pelicans, who my Action Network colleagues are so trendy on right now. Great win for the Thunder in that one. The bad, I'm going to have to talk about Anthony Davis. The Lakers are down 0-1 in a series in which they haven't beaten the Nuggets since, I don't know, the beginning of time is what it feels like. And then this morning on ESPN, there's a whole article about how Anthony Davis is outraged and upset over being excluded from Defensive Player of the Year finalist contention. Victor Wembanyama, Rudy Gobert among the finalists, along with Bam Adebayo. All three of those guys have better defensive seasons than AD. I don't necessarily know that Victor Wembanyama on a sub-500 team as a rookie deserves to be in that consideration, but I would probably put Jalen Suggs or Herb Jones in there. I would not have had Davis on there. I bet a lot on Davis to win DPOY, but I can't say that he should have won. You know why? Because he shouldn't have won. The Lakers were 16th in defense this season. You have to raise the team up. Oh, but D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves, it's not his fault. Okay, fine. But if you're going to win an award, sometimes you're going to have to overcome a little bit of adversity. The bigger problem here is like AD is going to have to show up in Game 2 if they're going to have any chance of making this a series versus the Nuggets. Nikola Jokic was 2 of 8 versus AD in Game 1. You go back and watch a lot of those shots and you're kind of like, I don't know, he probably can make those next time. In general, he shot over 53% in the regular season versus AD, and it was even better in last year's playoffs. But if AD really is the Defensive Player of the Year like he thinks he is, and it's so unfair that they didn't include him as a finalist. By the way, the Athletics player poll for the best defensive players of the league, yeah, he didn't make the list. He got in the others receiving votes category. So your peers don't agree with you either, AD. But if he wants to complain about this so much, you want to know how you set that record straight? You know how you change that expectation? You go out there and you have a phenomenal defensive performance and you actually make an impact against someone who is not an undersized young player on the Charlotte Hornets. This is not January. AD is going to have to show up and actually perform here if the Lakers are going to have any chance. If he guards Jokic more tonight, which he said might be a possibility full time, foul trouble I think is going to be very interesting. Lakers have gotten a great whistle all season. We'll see if he can stay out of foul trouble here. One more thing. The overreaction paradox. So everyone kind of wants to talk about don't overreact to game one. Don't overreact to game one. And it's hard because you see these games and it's the first game in the sample and you're just like, oh, this is going to go this way entirely. And so you want to fight against that. Here's kind of the problem. You kind of get to overreact a little bit. Teams who win game one at home go on to win the series 85% of the time. And that's 89% of the time in round one. That's via whowins.com. 90% of the time, the team that wins game one at home goes on and wins the series anyway. So you can talk about, well, it's not going to go like this. It's not going to go this way. The matchups won't be this. Shot variance. And that I think is all very good analysis and a good way to think about this, especially betting-wise. But I do think this is interesting. Teams who win game one and covered at home are 22-11 when the line moves toward them in game two. That counts for the Knicks and the Nuggets tonight in their game twos.
Okay, Matt. So this is where you have me interested because I think there were a few series you could point to in game one not going the way that we thought it would. And I think that's partly because there is some parity in both conferences that maybe we haven't seen, at least in like sort of the middle tier of each conference. So for instance, like Mavs Clippers, like didn't quite see a blowout of that magnitude coming. Suns T-Wolves, like I was confused going into the series because the Suns were favored in the game, the Suns were favored in the series. Odd. I think Pacers Bucks, you could have looked at that and thought, well, the Bucks are vulnerable, but I still kind of expected them to win game one. So I guess my question to you is, of the series that we're looking at, which is most likely to turn in game two?
Well, first off, I think maybe our big overreaction needs to be, given your takes here, I think we need to get you giving out some picks because you're absolutely right in your estimations on these things. The ones I think that can probably turn, I'll say this. I actually think Indiana, when I went back and went through the tape, I think Indiana's in a better spot than it looked like. Dame goes for 35. It looks awesome. The Pacers look completely inept. But the problem in that game was Pacers offense. This is the number 2 offense in the league. This is a Bucks defense that hasn't been good. When you go back and you watch, you just kind of go like, oh, this is like a young team figuring out that they can't run the same stuff that they do in the regular season in the playoffs. They need more from Tyrese Halliburton, but it's not so much like they need more in terms of better. Like the Pelicans need better from Brandon Ingram, and that means less of Brandon Ingram. The Pacers need more of Tyrese Halliburton because when he did attack, they got good looks. I kind of think that the result of last night's Thunder Pelicans game, everyone's going to be like, oh, it's going to be a long series. Oh, it's going to be tough. Oh, this Pelicans team. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know. They still lost and they completely wet the bed down the stretch. And that was the Thunder's first playoff game and they had more poise. So like, I kind of trust Mark Daigneault to figure out some more ways to adjust to this. Coaching, I think, is a big deal in this. We did this all on Buckets all week, Maria, talking about when we're doing previews, I would ask the question of who's got the better coach and who's got the best player in the series. Using those guidelines, you come out with some pretty interesting conclusions on these series, and we'll see if those hold as they go on.
Okay, applying that to the Mavericks, do we foresee a better effort in game two?
I think the better coach is over on the Los Angeles side, and
okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
If you want a fun one, just go on Twitter if you have an account and do a search for quote despite the loss end quote Luka, and you come up with some interesting observations about exactly what Luka Doncic's playoff resume actually looks like. I'm just saying it's probably something to consider as the series heads on.
Okay. Well, thank you for entertaining me on that. But we obviously have games tonight. You have a pick, and this is a side that you're not expecting much to change from game one to game two.
Yeah, I'm keeping this one pretty simple, and maybe I'm walking into a trap here by just kind of taking the assumptions from game one that played out in confirmation bias. But I was on Cavs -5.5 for the first bet of the weekend, and that one cashed, and I'm going back to the well here. I don't think this is a tactical series. I don't think this is about like how do you change matchups and adjustments. The problem is that the Orlando Magic do not have individuals who can throw the basketball at the hoop and have it go through the net thing. That's their problem. And there's not a lot of like tactical adjustments that you can run out to really fix that. Jalen Suggs ran 9 pick and rolls and scored 0 points on them. 0. That's rough. The Cavs had no trouble with Paolo Banchero running the inverted pick and roll, which was supposed to be a big pressure point for the Cavs. Donovan Mitchell is the best player in the series. The second best player is probably Darius Garland. The third best player in the series might be Jared Allen. And then we got Paolo Banchero, who's in his first playoff series, and I don't have like super high expectations. If there's one guy I think might do better tonight, probably Franz Wagner. I think he can have a much better game in this one. I think he probably started to figure some things out by the end of that game. But I think this is a talent mismatch. I think this is a coaching even matchup. And with the Cavaliers still under 2 possessions, I'll go ahead and lay the points with the Cavaliers -5.5. Though I will note that teams in the first round where the line stays the same from game 1 to game 2 after they won game 1, just 6 and 7 ATS. I'm looking to pull that even at 7 and 7 tonight because I'll take the Cavs -5.5.
Very nice. As you mentioned, you gave out the Cavs to cover on Nothing But Bet Saturday. Going back to it, Mr. President, thank you for your State of the Union.
God bless you. And God bless the NBA playoffs.
Taking a closer look at the 3-point prop market, Joel Embiid is at +120 to go under 1.5 threes. Action Pro gives this a 22% edge. Meanwhile, Gabe Vincent -130 to not make a 3-pointer with a 19% edge. And finally, Evan Mobley -112 also to not make a 3 has a 14% edge. It's 3 p.m. somewhere, so let's bring in Gilles Gallant for some props on 3-pointers made. And although I just outlined a few unders, you're actually looking at an over for your first pick tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, I respect the unders. I think it just has to be the right number. And one of my picks today is actually going to be an under. But the over pick that I like today, right at the Sixers versus Knicks game, I'm going with Jalen Brunson to have at least 3-pointers against the Sixers defense. It's around -120 to -125. I would play it up to about -130. Brunson, he averages just under 3-point makes since the All-Star break, but really playing well at home too. 8 of 11 home games in that stretch. He's gone over this line. Some of those games, Maria, he was hitting 5, 6, even 7 3-pointers in those games. Now, game 1, he didn't hit that. But I think that's actually giving us a little bit of an opportunity here because I'm projecting a bounce back in game 2. And had he had hit at least 3-pointers in game 1, we wouldn't be looking at an over under 2.5 line. This would be at over under 3.5 with around plus money on the over 3.5. And I think that's actually an opportunity for us because I expect Nick Nurse to make some adjustments. He's going to close out on some of those periphery shooters like a Deuce McBride and Josh Hart, which is why I expect Brunson to pick up the slack. And I also don't project Deuce McBride and Josh Hart going 9 for 17 from 3-point again here in game 2. Brunson as well played 41 minutes in game 1. I'm projecting at least 40 minutes again in game 2. That is really the Tibbs recipe. He loves to ride his stars. And the Sixers defense been a little bit more suspect versus opposing guards when stopping the 3-pointer. They're 23rd in 3-point makes and attempts to opposing guards during the regular season. Also, Maria, sometimes with these props, we can look at, volume and how many times he's hit it in the last 10 games, all those kinds of things. Sometimes with these props, you just need to bet on stars to be stars. So I think if you're going to be betting on a Knicks 3-point prop tonight, this is the one you bet on. Jalen Brunson over 2.5 3-pointers.
I couldn't agree more. One thing that you can always count on with Jalen Brunson on the New York Knicks is usage. And he very rarely has back-to-back 4 shooting nights. You mentioned how he struggled from the floor a bit. He was 1 of 6 from the 3-point line. I just like the idea of looking at him and not actually looking at the Philly side of things, because I just think there are too many question marks with the lineup that it could be a little bit unexpected where that shooting production comes for the Sixers. Now, this next prop, you mentioned it was an under, and it's a little bit of deja vu because this is a market that we have been high on here at Action Network on our various shows over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of starting to be an evergreen pick now, where you
Yeah.
could just recycle the footage from the past 3 shows that I've done and take this. But we're taking Anthony Davis to not hit a 3-pointer against the Nuggets, and I'm going to keep riding this until it loses, because we hit it both in both games against the Pelicans. I bet it as well in game one versus the Nuggets. Now, in game one against Denver, he actually took 4 3-point attempts. But if you're watching that game, none of those really looked like they were in flow of the offense, forcing it a bit. Like right now, you're seeing the footage. None of those shots looked like they were clear online. And based on the output and implied probability of the way he's been playing lately, just to bring that up, like last 26 games, that's since the All-Star break, he's only hit this in 8 games. So it's hitting 70% of where he's not hitting a 3-pointer in a game. But based on that output and implied probability, this should be closer to about minus 200. And even against Denver, from a matchup standpoint, played the one playoff game this year and 3 times during the regular season. He only hit this in 1 of 4 games, and that was the first game of the year. And then, of course, the playoff series last year and during the regular season. Since the start of last year, he's played Denver 11 times. He's only hit a 3-pointer in 3 of them, so that includes the playoff games. And also, Denver's defense, like we could overlook that, but during the regular season, pretty good against the 3-pointer, second in the NBA in opponent 3-point makes and attempts. And then, of course, I don't really want to put this out there. I feel bad juju when I say this, but we have to be honest with ourselves. Anthony Davis had a couple of falls in game one where it didn't look good. Like a couple of times he was getting up where I was like, oh, is this the one? And look, I don't wish injury on anyone, but like Anthony Davis is not exactly a picture of perfect health here. So if you're betting it, you're really only betting on Anthony Davis to hit a 3-pointer because he's due. And me personally, I think that's a horrible reason to make a bet.
Look, you have to mention anytime you're betting an Anthony Davis under, there is that idea of, could he leave the game potentially for a period, even if it's just for something small. And I think, when he makes a 3, it's kind of like a bonus for the Lakers. It is not at all like part of necessarily their winning formula or their formula for success. It's kind of just, like you said, it's just like, he finally hit one. So I don't hate going back to it. Gilles Gallant, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maria. We'll talk again soon.
To baseball, here's a market report for a couple of today's National League matchups. Phillies taking on the Reds, 82% of money on the Phils and 51% of money on the over, 8.5 runs. Padres and Rockies playing as well, 98% of money on San Diego and 68% of money on the over, 10.5 runs. And we'll tell you why these games are significant as we welcome in our predictive analyst, Billy Ward. Now, Billy, you built a model last season to predict whether a run will be scored in the first inning of MLB games. Can you give us a refresher on how it all works?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I start with the total, and you mentioned the total in the 2 games we're going to talk about. Divide that by 9, right? There's theoretically 9 innings, sometimes a little more, sometimes only half one in the 9th. And then I look at the splits from the batting perspective of how much production from each team comes from their first 3 hitters. We know the first 3 hitters are going to come up in the first inning. Obviously, the number 4 and 5 hitters matter too, but it's a little bit more complicated to predict whether they'll even get a chance to bat. And then most importantly, I look at the pitchers, because there's pitchers who do really well early in games, then kind of fall off as they get tired. There's other guys that they kind of need to settle in. If you're going to get to them, you get to them early. And I use their first time through the order splits. I use XFIP, but you could kind of use any ERA predictor that you want to do that. And that lets me find spots where the market's a little bit off. For the most part, it seems like sports books make the Yerfy-Nerfy line based on the game total and kind of just leave it at that. So if we look at the pitchers and hitters individually, we can kind of find some edges in specific scenarios.
Fascinating. And so how was the Reds-Phillies game just a good example of your model working out?
Yeah, this is exactly the kind of game I built this to try to find, because both pitchers, their first time through the order XFIP is under 2.5. XFIP is usually similar numbers to ERA. So you think these guys, on average, the first time through the order, so about the first 3 innings, their ERA is going to be well under 3. Hunter Green is like the best example of a nerfy pitcher. Comes out throwing 103 miles an hour and then kind of falls off the cliff once he gets tired and his velo drops. So even though the total in this game is a little bit on the high side, it was 9 earlier in the morning, we're still getting some good value on the nerfy. In the article I gave out, I said only down to -115. That was when the total was 9. Now we have an 8.5 total, as you mentioned. So you can get -120, -122, lines like that. More than happy with that. Really like both pitchers, how they start the game. I think of those 8.5 expected runs, we're going to see them a lot more later in the games than early.
Now, as far as the Padres Rockies game, you're actually going with the Yurfie instead.
I am. I've got burned a couple times this weekend on Coors Field Yurfies, but when they give us -120 on it, it feels too good to pass up. We've got a double-digit total in this game. 10.5 run total, bunch of money coming in on the over, might slide up to 11 by the time the game kicks off. Part of the problem was it was the Mariners in Colorado over the weekend. Padres a little bit better offense, and they're a little bit more top-loaded. But yeah, when we have this many runs, I was expecting to pay a lot more of a price on the Yurfie. I've got both teams fairly even, but more of it going towards the Padres. The Rockies' offense is rough in general. It obviously helps them a little bit to be at home, but they're still not a great unit. You can take single team Yurfies on DraftKings at pretty big plus money, so that's an option as well. The greater EV as far as my model is the -120 on the whole game Yurfie, though.
I love it. Well, thank you for the tutorial. We'll be following your work all season on actionnetwork.com. Obviously, you mentioned the article you have up. So for more, make sure if you're watching this that you also check that out. Billy, thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Overtime teams have cleaned up so far in the playoffs, going 6-0 straight up and doubling the road teams in goals scored. And outside of Colorado and Florida, every home team had a save percentage over 900 in their respective game one. As we bring in our NHL expert, Michael Leboff. Okay, I feel like you hear this a lot about hockey, where home ice doesn't matter, or, the home advantage isn't as big as it is in maybe some of the other major sports. Is that accurate? And how much does home ice matter this season?
Yeah, I mean, recent playoffs have shown us it's been a little overrated in the past few seasons, but I do think, it's obviously much better to be at home in most situations than to be on the road. You'd want to play that game 7 at home. I think every team would say that, maybe bar one would be the Toronto Maple Leafs, who have some trouble closing out those kind of series at home in their building because of just some ghosts. But I think looking at this season now, everyone's talking about the home teams being 6-0. I think that's a little bit of an aberration, and also the context here is that a bunch of these teams were sizable favorites. Like the Hurricanes were shorter than -200. The Rangers were shorter than -200 against the Capitals. They obviously both won. The Canucks were -150. When they won, the Panthers were higher than that when they won. So it's like these were just a bunch of big favorites that took care of their business. The only one that was close, even priced close to a coin flip, was Bruins and Maple Leafs, and that one was ended up not even going that way because of William Nylander's absence for the Maple Leafs. So I'd look at it more of favorites just are off and running than home teams here, because that's what it was. It's just a bunch of teams taking care of business.
There you go. And it does seem to be a bit of an anomaly, because apparently this has only happened where home teams have won 6 straight games to begin a playoff year 4 other times, and the last time was in 1970. So it's been a while, but one of the home teams to win game 1 was Carolina. They have game 2 tonight against your Islanders. So how do you see this one going?
Yeah, I thought the Islanders played a pretty good game in game 1 on Saturday night. The Hurricanes were obviously a massive favorite in that one. Nobody's really picking the Islanders to make much noise in the series. And the Islanders were really encouraging from that standpoint, because they were the better team through the first 40 minutes and probably should have been up 3 or 4-1 had it not been for the heroics of Frederik Andersen in goal for Carolina. So whether you want to look at that as a blown opportunity or a step in the right direction, that is up to the punter here. I would say that when you're dealing with a team at this price, you want to probably look at it as a step in the right direction, right? It's not like the Islanders are plus 120 here; they're plus 200. So just having that kind of performance is a good thing when you're dealing with underdogs at this price. So I'd go back to the Islanders at this price. They do make things pretty tough on their opponents. They've been playing much better under Patrick Waugh. Their defensive work has been good. The goaltending, it should still be there with Semyon Varlamov. JG Pajot gets back in the lineup here. So I think there's enough signs to make the Islanders worth it at this price. I mean, they didn't close as an underdog above plus 187 all season long. And now back-to-back games where they're in this range. So they're clearly better than this number suggests. It's just people really love this Hurricanes team.
Well, if the Isles do get a win, their mascot, Sparky the Dragon, is going to be very happy when the series goes back home to the island. What are the other bets that you like tonight?
Yeah, I like the 2-game ones out west. I actually like the same bet in both of these because I think in a weird way, the beginning of both these games will look the same, even though the matchups are quite different. For Vegas and Dallas, we're dealing with a Vegas Golden Knights team that perhaps has more question marks than any team in the playoff field, which is weird to say about a team that just won the Stanley Cup and we know is good. It's just, Mark Stone's been out for quite a while. He's one of their best wingers, perhaps their best winger. They also traded for Tomas Hertl and Noah Hannafin at the deadline. Hertl just got healthy with a few games left in the regular season, so we haven't seen this lineup at full strength yet with all their new toys. So we just don't know how good this Vegas team is. And plus, they haven't played together, so it might take a little while for that chemistry to develop. Meanwhile, Dallas is dealing with that conundrum on the other end where they're not going to be quite sure about how to approach, what's the best way to approach this team with Hertl, Hannafin, Stone in the lineup. So I think this looks like a pretty sleepy first period in Dallas and Vegas. So I like going under or the period to end scoreless going into the break 0-0 at plus 360. It's not, I just don't think it's going to be a pretty first period. And then if you look at the other matchup between the Oilers and Kings, we know exactly what both these teams want and what they should look like at their best and at their worst. For the Kings, they're going to want to neutralize speed as much as they can. They have a great trap system to do so. Really, really defensive, strong defensive team, Los Angeles is. And then Edmonton, they want to go north and south. They just want to create chances off the rush. They want to use their speed. They want to use their creativity with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard on the back end. But this is going to be an unstoppable force and an immovable object. And I think in the first period where you're trying to get your legs under you in a playoff series, that usually leads to some pretty stodgy play. Both teams have goaltending questions, so I think they're going to try to insulate their goaltenders as much as possible as well. So I think that both of these games have a decent chance to go to the break at 0-0. So hopefully one of them comes through here at the very least.
And just FYI, in both cases, once again, you see the home teams are favored. Michael Leboff, good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Remember, any picks we give out here on the show, like the ones you just heard from Mike, you can easily reference by following green.daily in the Action app. We keep track so you don't have to. That's all for green.daily. I'm Maria Marino. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the show is back tomorrow at 3 Eastern on the Action Network YouTube channel and the Action app.